Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hellacious Hero Returns. I am Hellacious Hero Joe, and it has been a long time since I have made a video for this channel. A recent move into a different house. My computer died last year. Actually, in 2020 it did. It was 2022. And I finally just got a new one. So, trying to coordinate stuff, trying to get things back to the way I want them to be. Not quite as comfortable yet with the layout or anything, but it's a work in progress. And what better time to make a video than with the release of the new Batman movie, The Batman. And that's what today's video is going to be about. I'm so stoked to talk about it. I love it. Be back in a minute. So, if you stuck around for the opening sequence and you saw what I was talking about and how long it's been and what I'm going to get into today, it's going to be about the Batman. Matt Reeves, the Batman that just came out yesterday, day before, early premiere, and how phenomenal of a movie it is. And before I get into the actual Batman, I just want to talk about Batman films in general and my experience with Batman films since I was a kid. Just the main films, the live action. None of the animated stuff, nothing else. Just since I was a kid. So it's going to be Michael Keaton, it's going to be Christian Bale, it's going to be Ben Affleck, it's going to be Robert Pattinson. And when I talk about these guys, I want to correlate them to the Batman movie and how the Batman movie takes bits and pieces from all of those different versions of Batman and puts them into the movie. Because Matt Reeves and his direction and how he did this is outstanding. And I'm going to say this right now. This is my second favorite Batman movie after The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight is not only an amazing Batman movie, it's an amazing film in general. It's one of the greatest movies of all time, in my opinion. With that being said, it's not quite as good as The Dark Knight. I don't think so, but it's close. It is very, very close. It's like a step down from The Dark Knight. But, first off, Michael Keaton in the Burtonverse with Batman 1989 and Batman Returns really set the tone for that dark, gloomy, dreary, depressing, kind of like nihilistic Gotham City, which is what Batman is about. And that's why I'm not even going to talk about the Joel Schumacher versions of the characters, even though they were around when I was a kid too. The Val Kilmer Batman, the George Clooney Batman. They don't exist, in my opinion. They were okay when I was a kid because everything's awesome when you're a kid. You don't know, what's good and what's bad. You can't really tell yet. You're learning. But as a film critic and as somebody who appreciates film and really getting to the roots of this character, those two movies, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, were off the mark a lot. So, I mean, even the animated series with Kevin Conroy, that was more aligned and paid more of an homage and more cerebral than the two Schumacher movies. So, cast those aside. They're not included in the conversation. But as I was talking about Burton, Michael Keaton as Batman and as the character Batman, phenomenal. I mean, really stoic. A very stoic kind of, doesn't really talk very much, very nonchalant, does what he needs to do kind of thing. His voice is perfect. Now, as Bruce Wayne, he's kind of humorous, but that's Michael Keaton. You know, his entire film repertoire before Batman was comedies, for the most part. He didn't really do any serious movies. This is like his first serious role. And as you can see him as an actor developing later down the line, he does take on some more serious stuff later in his career. But it's because of Batman that he's able to do that. Just getting into that character and channeling that. And I'm very excited to see what he does with Ben Affleck in the upcoming Flash movie this November. So I'm super stoked about that. Great year for DC movies. But Gotham itself, Batman himself, the way the characters are created, the Joker and how he's created, Jack Nicholson's portrayal, excellent. But more so, I love Batman 1989. I think it's an amazing film. But I'm actually more of a fan of Batman Returns. I think it's darker. I think it's grimier. I think it's dirtier. I think it has that more, corruption setting around it. Whereas the first 1989 film was more, this is the Joker, these are the crime bosses, he becomes a crime boss, that kind of aspect. And you can see that correlated in Matt Reeves with the Penguin, that kind of aspect, where he's kind of like the second-hand man to Carmine Falcone, and then he becomes, towards the end, you'll see, his character flourish and become something else. I'm not going to spoil it for you. But that kind of thing with Jack Napier and Jack Nicholson's portrayal when Carl Grisham gets killed in the 1989 film, that similarity is so, it's in Reeves' picture. Matt Reeves took the utmost detail, and you can see that he probably watched, if I had to guess, or remembered every Batman movie since Burton, and he really honed in on the guys I was talking about. Keaton, Bale, Affleck. Those portrayals in particular, because they are, in my opinion, the best Batmans to learn from. And even Conroy, to a certain extent. You can see that in there as well. And the comic books. The source material. So, with the Burtonverse, the grimy, dirty, downtrodden city of Gotham is really prevalent in this film. And it does kind of have this grandiose, almost fantastic spectacle of the city, where it's Gotham in this version of the movie is nothing like I'd ever seen it. It's very different. It's very gothic in design. Not gothic yet modern. It's kind of a mixture of the Burtonverse Gotham City with the Nolanverse Gotham City. They're kind of like intertwined in this movie, and it's perfect. Like, it's awesome. It works extremely well. You really get this dirty, grimy feeling when you see the movie. And the art design and the colors and everything, that's just kind of, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal to look at. It's beautiful to look at. I love every second of this movie. It's amazing. It's an amazing film. Now, to take from the Burtonverse and now transition to Nolan with characters like Penguin and Catwoman, they were very dark in Returns. And it's cool that Matt Reeves used Penguin and Catwoman in this film too, along with the Riddler. Now, here's where they kind of intertwine Burtonverse and Nolanverse again in the Reevesverse Batman, because you have Paul Dano as the Riddler, and his interpretation of the Riddler is very, very sadistic and scary. He's a serial killer in this. It's very reminiscent of Heath Ledger's Joker. This very sadistic, just evil, malevolent force. It's a hell of a performance. It's amazing. Paul Dano's Riddler might be my second favorite on-screen villain ever, and I that's saying a lot, based on Ra's al Ghul by Liam Neeson and Cillian Murphy's Scarecrow and Tom Hardy's Bane. For me, he is my second favorite villain in Batman live action after Heath Ledger's Joker. I think it's just a phenomenal performance. And again, Matt Reeves really paying attention to the details of these characters that he's creating. It is very, very reminiscent of Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight. Am I saying it's as good? I don't think that the Batman, like I said earlier, is quite as good as the Dark Knight film. That movie is timeless. And this is what these movies should be. They should be designed to be timeless. They shouldn't be like funny, and corny and have humor in because, and I saw a lot of critics saying that, oh, the Batman's so dark and dreary, there's really no humor in it. Well, that's what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be funny. It's not supposed to be the Schumacher version of the character. It's not supposed to be the Marvel Cinematic Universe with all this happy stuff. It's a very dark and dreary place. Gotham is bad. We see it in the comic books all the time. It's a criminal underworld that's taken over by criminals. There's slums. There's poverty. It's really dark. It's really depressing. People turn to crime in Gotham City. I mean, where Bruce's parents got killed was called Crime Alley. I mean, it's crime. This isn't a happy place. It's not bubbly. It's scary. It's a scary place. And that's why this dark and foreboding atmosphere is required. And that's why Tim Burton's Batman and Nolan's Batman and now Reeves' Batman really hit this home. And it's phenomenal. Again, with Penguin and Catwoman, they are very, very closely aligned to many other versions of characters that are kind of mismatched. So Colin Farrell's Penguin which looked incredible, by the way, a very different Penguin than Danny DeVito's. A very different Penguin. Where Danny DeVito's Penguin had that origin story with, him being abandoned as a child. He lived in the sewer. He grew up. He eventually becomes the mayor. But he's trying to, rule the city by being corrupt because he has this kind of underground. He's murdering people. He's killing people. The toxic waste stuff. That isn't really what this Penguin is about. He's a fledgling Penguin. He's not a fully developed crime boss yet. He's getting there. He's getting there. So that is a kind of progression for the character that we see a little bit of. And I know there's supposed to be a spin-off TV series with Colin Farrell's Penguin, so we'll probably get to see kind of like what they did with Peacemaker. In the Suicide Squad, he has a really small bit to play, but then in the Peacemaker TV series, it's full on, like it's about him. So we'll probably see that, if it's my guess, in the Penguin spin-off series on HBO Max, whenever that comes out. But Catwoman with Zoe Kravitz, she brings so many different, like when I watched the movie, so many different versions of Catwoman into the forefront. In particular, I know the Halle Berry movie of Catwoman was pretty bad. It wasn't that great. I mean, the story was horrible, but she looked good as the character. I mean, she looked like Catwoman. And I think that's one thing about Zoe Kravitz that I notice. I mean, the way she moves and that kind of like ability to be a martial artist, and she's tough and that kind of thing, reminds me of Halle Berry, but also Anne Hathaway and also Michelle Pfeiffer. I mean, every little piece is in there. And she gets a motorcycle in the movie, much like Anne Hathaway gets the motorcycle in The Dark Knight Rises. It's really neat, all these little kind of connecting pieces to all the movies. And I don't even know if it was actually designed to be fan service, but it certainly feels like it. Or if it's just the nature of the characters and how things thematically unfolded. But it's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal film. Her story and her relationship with Batman is excellent. I think it's great. You saw that in Burtonverse with Michelle Pfeiffer and Batman, but they end up being enemies, even though Bruce Wayne is dating Selina, and then they are two different people. They're Batman and they're Catwoman, and then she finds out he's Batman at the end, and she finds out he's Bruce, and it's like, oh. But she sacrifices herself, right? Electrocutes herself with a taser. With Max Schreck, it was kind of that kind of, Max Schreck pushed her out the window, so she gets her revenge finally by electrocuting him at the end, and that's how she ends up meeting her demise too. And then Anne Hathaway's Catwoman and Batman, in the Dark Knight trilogy, Dark Knight Rises, just how she goes from being this cat burglar into being a hero almost at the end, helping to save the world from the micro emitter that's like pretty much a nuke. It's going to blow up Gotham City and blow up the world, right? From Bane and the League of Shadows. And to finish what happened in Batman Begins. that kind of progression with that almost anti-hero pseudo-villain into a hero is sort of what Zoe Kravitz does when she progresses throughout the movie. So it's kind of a Anne Hathaway mixed with Michelle Pfeiffer with Halle Berry. It's just perfect. Little bits and pieces of all these little things come out. John Turturro as Carmine Falcone. He's excellent. Probably the most ruthless version of Falcone I've ever seen on the big screen. You know, the Batman Begins version was there, and he was a little scary, but nowhere near as like just evil and cruel. He's like, I don't want to ruin it for him, but he's strangling people in this movie, and he's evil. He's sinister. And another thing that this movie hits home so well is the corruption piece. I can't begin to sit here and tell you what it feels like in the detective piece of this. And I've seen interviews with Jeffrey Wright and Pattinson and Zoe Kravitz and Paul Dano and Andy Serkis and Matt Reeves, and never in a Batman film ever have they really showed he's the world's greatest detective. They've kind of hinted at it here and there, very small segments. You know, if I were to say percentile, I would give Burton-verse and like the detective piece in that maybe like a 5%. I would give the Nolan-verse is probably like, you know, a 15 to 20% showing his detective stuff. It's up there. It's pretty good. And then, you know, you have the Snyder-verse, which shows a little bit of that too, maybe 10%, not a lot. But this movie, I mean, it's like 50% of it is just him being a detective, and the other 50% is him kicking ass or forming alliances, and it's a really different take on the character. And like Robert Pattinson's performance, I know it was like super critiqued and like nobody wanted him to be, oh, this is a horrible casting. It is amazing. He's an amazing Batman. He's my second favorite on-screen Batman after Christian Bale. He kills the role. He slays it as a detective. He's super smart. And I've always said, because I'm a Greek historian too, and I love antiquity, you know, if Batman were to be an ancient Greek hero, like if you're reading the Odyssey, Batman would be Odysseus. He's the one who is the strategist. He's the planner. He's the detective. And that kind of Odyssean kind of mindset really comes through with him in the Batman. And Pattinson slays it. He slays the detective thing. And so does Jeffrey Wright. I mean, Jeffrey Wright and him in this, the greatest. Gary Oldman and Christian Bale had an awesome team up, and they were great. But it was more in the lines of like, Batman would figure something out, and he would tell Gary Oldman, and Gary Oldman would just do what Batman said, kind of thing, in the Dark Knight trilogy. Whereas in this, it's almost like they're really working together to figure out what's going on. Like, Batman has a little bit of information here, Gordon has some information, they kind of come together, and then they both go do things, and then meet up again. It's kind of like this. It's almost like Gordon is his partner in this. You know, it's like Gordon is Robin, so to speak. And it's awesome, and I love it. And he's a sergeant, he's a street cop, and it really shows his character and how he's developing. And now that brings me to the Snyderverse version of Batman. And I want to say this. The thing with the Snyderverse version of Batman with Ben Affleck was a great Batman. He was, you know, kudos to him. He did a hell of a job. The suit was amazing. His performance was really good. But the problem with Batman in the DCEU, as it were, was that Batman is one of those heroes, in my opinion, where you need to have a grounded Batman tale. You know, it has to be Batman center stage. Because he's your most popular property. If you put him in a movie with Wonder Woman, and you put him in a movie with Superman, the emphasis would probably need to be on him over those other characters. And I think that's why Batman versus Superman, and not so much Zack Snyder's Justice League, because there are a lot of things that were changed and edited, but the original Justice League was such a flop because you had too much emphasis on Superman and Wonder Woman, who in reality are supporting characters in the grand scheme of the universe, because everybody knows Batman, you know? If you were to sit here, can you name 15 or 20 Wonder Woman villains? Can you name 15 or 20 Superman villains? But you could sit here and you can name 15, 20, you can name 30 Batman villains, because he is DC Comics. He's the face of DC Comics. And that's why he's my favorite hero. He always has been. And it's never going to change, no matter what. I love DC. I grew up watching Batman. Batman's my number one. Nobody will ever come close. And that's why I love this movie, too, because it's so true. So true to everything I love about the character. You've seen some of my old videos where I talk about my love for Batman and some of my favorite comics. It is amazing how Matt Reeves channels that comic book complexity, the very dark, grimy stories, the more mature DC Black Label. Think of this movie as a DC Black Label movie. It's PG-13, but it's pushing that PG-13. I mean, it could very well be R. And it would have been cool if it would have been R, because there would have been a lot more stuff in there that we would have seen gore-wise, probably more. There's a scene in there with some stuff that you don't get to see because it's not R, but you could think about it, though. You know, it makes you think. So that's cool, too. You have that kind of like ambiguity where you're like, oh, I wonder what it looks like, and you think about it. But this is a DC Black Label movie, and outside of the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix, I think it's the second of its kind. You had, Joker with Joaquin, you have this. And I think they're really dark in the best possible way, because that's how I like my comics. That's why I love Batman, because he's supposed to be this way. One thing about the Snyderverse that Matt Reeves takes into consideration is Alfred in particular, that character. More of a hardened version of Alfred. He has a militaristic background. He's the one who teaches Bruce how to fight. He helps him fix his things. Where in the Dark Knight trilogy, it was Lucius Fox mostly supplying him with all the materials and the equipment. And Alfred was more of like a parental figure, a guardian figure in that series. Much like in the Tim Burton stuff. He's more of a parental guardian figure, and Bruce is kind of left to his own devices. Michael Keaton's version. Same thing with Christian Bale. He's there to support him as a parental figure, but he's not really a fighter. He's not really a techie guy. He does have a past that he was in the military, because he talks about being in Burma in Dark Knight, and some people just want to see the world burn. He tells Bruce that. But he doesn't really show that on screen. Andy Serkis, to a certain extent, doesn't really show that on screen either, but he conveys it that way. Like, hey, look, I wasn't really a parent to you. I was more of a mentor figure, more of a coach, more of a trainer, more of a motivator, someone to watch over you. Not really a father, but just someone to support you. So you kind of have that thing. And that's a great thing about Pattinson's performance, too, where he's just like, he didn't have a dad, and Alfred was just a guy who was watching him as a butler. Now, it's not that he doesn't care about Alfred. He does care about him. It shows that he cares about him. But he knows that he's not his father. He loves him, but he kind of does everything on his own. And Alfred does help do some things, but this Bruce in here is very much a tinkerer. He's kind of like his own little inventor in a way. He has Alfred support, or he had Alfred support in the past. You don't really get to see a lot of that because this takes place in like Batman's second year of crime fighting. It's not an origin story. It's just like one of the biggest scores he's ever done with the Riddler. So, with that being said, what do I rate this movie out of 10? I'm rating it a 9 out of 10. It's a solid 9 out of 10. It's one of the greatest times I've had seeing a movie in a very, very long time. It brought back so much nostalgia for me to go there and witness that. And here's an example. I got so stoked for Batman vs. Superman when it came out. And I was like, yes, Ben Affleck looks great. The movie looks awesome. I went and saw it in theaters, and I was like, man, what a letdown. That was a Superman movie. And if they would have called that Man of Steel 2, like that, just very subtle, Man of Steel 2 featuring Batman and Wonder Woman, that would have made me appreciate the movie more, because it's not Batman versus Superman. There's a scene in there where they fight each other for 10 minutes, and that's it. That's the only time they fight each other. So that title was very misleading. And I went in there with expectations of like, oh my god, we're going to get this Batman story, we're going to get a Superman story, Wonder Woman's going to make a cameo in it. But it was more like Superman, 80%, Batman, 10%, Wonder Woman 5%, and then everything else, the rest of the movie. And it was just like, oh man, I was really hoping for more. with Batman. And then the extended edition came out, and it was a little bit better. The ultimate cut, good, but it was like, you're still like, man, this isn't, because like I said, you don't get that. You don't get Gotham. You don't get the villains that you would see in Gotham. You don't get that underlying corruption. You tried to make Superman kind of like a villain. It was okay, but it wasn't But then when I saw this, the Batman in theaters, it brought me back to seeing Batman Begins. I saw that movie in New Orleans when I was on vacation with my family. Me and my brother went to the theater like 3 times and saw it there. When I came home, I saw it again 1 or 2 more times. Saw it like 5 times in the theater because I loved it so much. When Dark Knight came out, I saw that 4 or 5 times in the theater, and that movie was just so powerful to me. I mean, it was me, my best friend, my brother. Then we got a couple of our other friends going to see it. We all saw it at least 3 times. I saw it 5 times. They saw it at least 3 or 4 times. I mean, it's that kind of thing. And then The Dark Knight Rises, when I saw that in theaters too, I was like, man, what a great movie. Not quite as powerful, but this is the best Batman movie since The Dark Knight. I think it's better than Dark Knight Rises. I think it's better than Batman Begins. I think it's better than Batman 1989 and Batman Returns. Like I said, it's my second favorite, and I think it's the second best Batman movie of all time. There's something to be said about a film that does that for you. And there's something to be said about this character that just is literally lurking in the shadows. That's a metaphor, right? And it's a pun, and it's pun intended. Lurking in the shadows for our attention. I mean, this is a character that wants to be fleshed out, wants to be explored in the way that Matt Reeves is doing it. And I give that guy all the credit. Phenomenal direction in this movie. Dark, gritty. Michael Giacchino's soundtrack is unbelievable. It's so satisfying. It's so reminiscent of the Dark Knight trilogy. Danny Elfman's score on the original stuff with Michael Keaton. And I loved it. Everything about this movie is phenomenal. The only reason I give it a 9 out of 10 is because the plot is very slow. It's a slow burn at the beginning, and then there's a point where it just takes off, and you cannot stop looking. I couldn't stop looking, period, but there's a point where you're just like, wow, what is going on? There's so much stuff here. The Batmobile chases in it, you're going to love when you see that. The crime aspect, him as a detective, new gadgetry that I've never seen Batman use before. I'm not going to spoil it, but stuff that people were talking about, why doesn't he have triangular blades on his armor anymore? That's not Batman. And it's like, well, wait till you see what he does with some of the tech he has, It's crazy. It's awesome. It's innovative. It's a hell of a way for new kids and a new generation to get into the character. Highly, highly recommend this movie. Go see it. Make it number 1 in the box office for the next month or whatever, because it deserves it. I want to see the sequel right now. I want to see it right now. I mean, I'm so anticipating to see what they do next. I can't. There's characters that I've never seen on the big screen before, and I think right now this opportunity, and I'll say it right now, what I want to see for the sequel, or even if it's a third film, if they make a trilogy, I want to see them recreate Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's run on Batman, in particular the Court of the Owls. I would love to see that. And this Gotham and this city and this cast of characters and everybody involved in this iteration and this version of Batman and of Gotham and in the Rose Gallery would fit the mold, in my opinion, to a perfect 10, a T, if they did Court of the Owls for the second movie, for the Batman. I mean, even if it was called the Batman Court of the Owls, that's a perfect name right there. That's all you need. So you have the Batman Court of the Owls, and then for the third one, who cares what they do? I just want to see Court of the Owls. I know it's going to be great under Reeves' direction. He's a hell of a filmmaker, so I cannot wait to see what he does with this franchise. 9 out of 10. Go see it. Highly recommend it. Phenomenal film. Every actor and every actress in this movie was perfectly cast for their roles. There's no discrepancies there whatsoever. The only reason it doesn't get a perfect 10 for me is because it's kind of a slow burn. And I will say I have a little bit of bias, and I was comparing it the entire time to Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. I already think it's better than Batman Begins by a step, and I already think it's better than Dark Knight Rises by a step. It is right there as my second favorite, The Dark Knight and The Batman. my second favorite Batman movie of all time, and that's coming from me. I'm not saying that I'm an expert on Batman. I mean, I do got a ton of statues and cows and stuff back here because I'm a huge fan. I'm wearing a Batman shirt, and I've been a fan for 30 years, but for me as a Batman fan, this is exactly what I wanted. This was a great thing to reinvigorate the franchise. I'm so happy, and I'm so proud of everybody who created this, and I'm so proud to be a fan. I'm so proud to be a Batman fan because these are real world issues that we deal with. This isn't sunshine and rainbows or humor. This is the reality that the world can be a dark, scary, evil, dastardly, corrupt, a place that can just grind you in the dust at times, even on your best day, and I think it showcases it exceptionally well. Matt Reeves and the entire cast of this film, excellent job. Kudos, hats off to you. Everyone go see the Batman. Until next time.
You talking to me? Huh? You talking to me?